Welcome to the Story 516 podcast, where we sit down with Christians from across denominations and talk about how God is at work in the world today and inspire you to see God at work in your own life in new ways. Welcome to the Story 516 podcast. My name is Zach, and I am here today with a friend of mine that I've actually just met this past year in 2023, Pastor Michael Slotten.
Hey, it's good to be with you.
Yeah.
It's fun to spend some time with you again.
Yeah. I remember we got to know each other in the public school setting where I was working my position as a part-time library assistant in a middle school, and then you ended up being our long-term sub in the library at the start of the 2023 school year. And it was just cool because I think the first time I noticed anything Christian about you, because it's like a secular work environment. I don't know, when do you approach a religious conversation? Because generally speaking, they're, I think, viewed as taboo.
Yep.
But I noticed you had a sticker on your water bottle, I think, Rescue House Church.
Yep.
And I was like, well, I viewed that as a door that was open. So I was like, I'm going to ask you about that. It's like sticker on a water bottle, tattoo. I'm going to ask you about it. I'm curious.
I think that's fair game. Yep.
And then you were able to share that was the church that you pastor. And it was just really neat. And I felt very blessed to be able to go into work every day. And we worked together. Like we had like half an hour before someone else showed up a lot of times. And like we would just have these conversations that could like go spiritual if we wanted to, which was so cool because I've spent my life working in secular jobs, and it's very rare that I'm able to have a conversation like that.
No, I totally agree. Ditto is the word for me because I agree. It was always a treat to be able to talk to you because, yeah, there's a lot of challenges that we were dealing with, and to be able to deal with them or talk through them with somebody that had a similar worldview, it was a big blessing. So, yeah, I miss it, but I can say it was really fun.
Yeah, and then in those conversations, the gears started turning in my head where I was like, oh man, Michael would be such a great guest to have on because you're head pastor at a church, but you're also working full-time as a sub in the school setting.
A substitute teacher, yep.
So you have this unique perspective of working a secular job and a spiritual job, if we want to label them like that.
Yeah.
And I was just like, that's such an interesting perspective because a lot of times it's so easy to get kind of like segmented off into your little domain or little niche of, oh, I have a job in a church, so I only hang out with believers, or I have a job doing finances, so like that's the crowd that I hang out with. So I was just curious about your perspective. Would you mind giving like a little like mini bio for yourself about kind of like what made you you? How did you get to this place in your life?
Absolutely. No, I think it's interesting for the most part. A lot of my experience with God is it's always been a surprise about like what his plans are for me. He's opened doors that I didn't expect and closed doors that I didn't expect. So, like that's like you make a plan and it's different than what you thought. So for me, I grew up going to church, but didn't live out a relationship with Jesus practically aside from, a couple hours a week, right? Engaging with church on a Sunday morning and then on a Wednesday night, right? And then when I encountered some hardship in college, that kind of rocked my world, honestly. Like my identity was shattered. I was lost. We'll just say that.
Yeah.
Right? I was really lost. It was challenging to know what to do. Like for me, I was in a state of severe depression and suicidal, thoughts. And I thought, well, the only thing that I can do at this point is either try to trust God or give up. And I really didn't like that alternative of giving up. So.
Well, it's interesting because I feel like a lot of people that I've met, it's kind of been that high school or college, there's some major change, which makes sense because those are kind of the formative years that people talk about, or just seeing that pattern crop up in so many people's stories about that's when God got a hold of them or God became more real to them.
Well, yeah, I think that coming of age, loss of innocence, thing is probably at play. But at the same time, you like lean on maybe your parents' faith, if that's how you were raised,
Right.
in a Christian household or in a household that, at least attends church. And then it comes a kind of a turning point where it's like, okay, do I believe this to the point that it's going to impact the way that I live?
Right. So what happened for you then, kind of going into that college time, depression, that
Yeah.
crossroads of, do I trust God with this or give up?
Yeah. Well, like I had mentioned, my identity was really challenged because I thought that my identity was found in, for lack of a better term, things of the world, relationships, careers, just a future that looked good from the outside. And I had several of those things in place. I was just graduating college and had a decent job with the government, but one of the components was not in the right place. So there were several, right? But it was a relationship that ended due to an abortion. And that like combination led to a spiral. And so I had months of just going to work depressed and then coming home and weeping and just wanting it to end. And then one night I ended up checking myself into a hospital for the thoughts, the plans that I had. While I was there, I think God just kind of woke me up. Like I would say, I didn't have like that visual encounter, or I didn't have an audible voice or anything like that, but really God met me there and reminded me of some things that I knew but didn't probably let like touch my heart. And then they did really kind of, it's like, okay, maybe this is true. Maybe this is something that I can believe again and really trust in, rely on. So I started to do that. And that was kind of the turning point of like, okay, I'm going to just trust you with all of this. But it wasn't until I got to that like moment of breaking where I was willing to do that. I will give him some parts of my life, but not others. Relationships being one of them, the things that I valued most being another. So all that to say, yeah, it was a big turning point for me. And then I started to pursue that relationship with him, do the things that people that call themselves followers of Jesus do. So what do they do? And, being really engaged based on the scriptures and Christian community and all those things, prayer, and having mentors in my life, whether that was, Christian counselors or other pastors. But at that time I was not in, Christian circles per se, other than maybe a church. And I went to school to be a scientist. So I was like, didn't have a ton of community in that area. But then just slowly, gradually over time, continued to change the way that I lived my life and tried to align it with God's will and live a life of obedience, live a life of faith. I thought that was becoming like a missionary, kind of melding my science background with Jesus, and went and did a master's degree in water quality and ended up not going that direction, finished the degree, but ended up becoming a youth pastor.
Okay.
And it was like
science and water degree to youth pastor. It tracks.
Everybody's, I don't know, youth pastor's an interesting role.
We could stretch and be like, Jesus did say you'll be fishers of men, and that's on the water. And you could try and draw a connection there if you wanted.
I like that. Yeah, that maybe is it. I'll have to explore that a little more. But
we can workshop that analogy.
Anyway, yeah, I didn't plan that either. I started serving in a local church while I was doing my master's degree, just by setting up and tearing down. And I got really passionate about starting a men's ministry. But then the lead pastor asked me to be the youth pastor when I was having coffee with him. And I thought, okay, maybe whatever you want. And that led to just God revealing some things to me about personal gifts, and did that for several years. And moved back to where I currently live in Fargo and started a church with my wife in 2020.
Great year
And
to start a church.
the best. Yeah, it was definitely interesting. We had a lot of conversations with our sending church about postponing, by maybe a year. It was a tough time to make decisions because we kind of had this business plan laid out. This is what we're going to do. And then all of a sudden, okay, what are we going to do? But we moved forward with it, and it's been really sweet, how God has been so gracious with us as young leaders, young church, like made a lot of mistakes, but also learned a lot about him. So it's been really cool. And then I started being bivocational a couple years ago, just because our church is a smaller community, and the financial strain was getting to the point of, hey, this is not feasible. Praying that God would open a door, and he did. And I guess being a youth pastor and being a substitute teacher, God was like, yep, this is the right thing. And I think it's been really sweet. I've learned so much about the community that I once lived. I was gone for almost 10 years. So a lot's changed in this community. And so it's been fun to reconnect and also see the needs of the people that I get to serve.
Well, I mean, like, that's got to be so encouraging, starting something like a church in 2020 when I felt like most of the year, or at least half the year, everything was just shut down. But seeing it last and grow over that time, where it's like, we're going to plant this seed in what to you or I probably looks like the most unlikely soil that something will grow. But then we serve a God who's like, don't worry about it. I got it.
Yeah. We started the church in an old bar downtown.
Okay.
And it was actually the bar that was in it moved out because of COVID, and there was no longer a tenant in there. And so then we moved into it, and it was a really sweet space. And then we moved out, and the bar moved back in like last year. So it's been interesting to go in there like, oh, this is where we were worshiping. And now it's like, there's other things happening there. Yeah, it's been interesting. We were a part of a mega church. Our parent church was a unicorn in the community that we were in the sense that there was nothing like it.
Yeah.
And so it was like rapid growth, like on every level, like even on a national level, people are like, this is growing way faster than what we're used to. And so we got to see a lot of things happening in that community that were unique. And so we've kind of been learning a different lesson here, like, oh, we're not the unicorn here,
Right.
but at the same time, like, we're not meant to be either. And so God's really been teaching me. I'm 35 years old, and he's really been teaching me about just his path for my life, and also the local church, like the bride of Christ, what that is, what wins are, like what's a spiritual next step, and what do we celebrate? What do we maybe over inflate a little bit, and just because we're humans and we like to pat ourselves on the back.
Yeah.
So it's been really good, but learning a lot.
Yeah. That's a good point of kind of comparing, where it's like, you don't have to be the unicorn. You don't have to look exactly like other churches. I know when I was younger, I think I would get frustrated being like, oh, there's so many denominations. Why is there so much disunity amongst the church? And yeah, like, we can have, like, that's a conversation for another time, disunity. But now looking at it, I'm like, each of these churches seems to connect to maybe like a slightly different subset of the population, or they have different gifts. So
yeah,
like,
absolutely. I think
the church I grew up with is really good at connecting with, like, I think they had a strong passion at least at the time for like missions work. And then the church I currently go to has, I think, a bigger ministry connected to people kind of in halfway houses or coming out of prison even. And it's like very different groups of people are going to attend these churches. And I'm really thankful that I can see that as positives now rather than negatives.
I think that's a mature view too, like that you have, because I don't think, as easy as it sounds, it's harder to value churches' diversity than yeah, it's just hard to value it sometimes because, again, we think we know what's best. There's a lot of different churches for a lot of different people, but that's a lesson that I've had to learn. It sounds like you've had to learn that lesson as well because, yeah, there's so much division in the world, but also in the church world as well, which you like, oh, really? But yeah, I think that we really allow the enemy to hurt us because we spend so much time comparing each other. At least I do. And in the past have spent so much time, finding the flaws in things rather than finding the beliefs that we share and trying to lift each other up. And there's a lot of wise people older than me that have really given me some, like, a picture into that to really value it more too. So I appreciate them. But
Changing gears just a little bit, kind of going back to your bivocational life currently.
sure.
Has that, like, working both in the public school and then also pastoring, has that given you like a unique perspective on how God's at work in the world today?
Yeah, I don't know if it's a personal thing or not, but yeah, I would say he's definitely revealed some things to me that are really critical in the mission of the church as a whole. When we look at the early church in the book of Acts, we see it was quite diverse, a lot of different gifts, a lot of different walks of life. So there was a lot going on. But yeah, for me, the cool thing about the journey of being bivocational is that I've built a lot of relationships, which as a pastor, you really value. I really value relationships. Otherwise, I probably wouldn't be in pastoral ministry. Right. It lends itself to some of my giftings personally, like, encouragement, things like that, where I get to do some of that almost ministry within a secular setting. One thing I recognize is a hunger from people. So like in the secular world, you think, oh, we can't talk about this, church, separation of church and state or whatever it is. But when I say, oh yeah, I'm a pastor, people are hungry. A lot of people want to talk more. Just the other day, I had a high school student that came up to me in Walmart. I had one of our kids in my arms and I was like getting out the door and she was like, hey, I know you. And she started talking to me about God because we had talked about it in the class that I was subbing for. And she was asking me questions about God and wanting to grow in her faith. Like in Walmart, she just came up to me as I was checking out and started talking to me. And there was a lot of people there because it was like a couple days before Christmas. Otherwise, I would have probably talked more. And I had a baby in my hands. But I
love that picture, Walmart, the fields of God's ministry.
Oh my gosh, yes.
I mean, it's a great place if you want to have interactions with lots of people.
Absolutely, especially when it's like the day before Christmas Eve too. Yeah, so I think there's just a lot of neat things, for me living as a follower of Jesus is like the mission is pretty clear, right? Like, hey, this is what you're on the earth for, is to know and worship God, but also to share him with others, right? The greatest commandment, love God and love people. How we do that, though, is probably going to look different than we thought it was, right? And so I've really been learning a lot about that. But like I said, I think the biggest thing that's surprised me is like the hunger for something spiritual. Some people won't call it God, but like they're hungry for something spiritual, and I believe that that's a relationship with Jesus. They might try other things. 7 out of 10 times, people are going to ask me questions about the church, beliefs. They're going to open up and talk to me about things that they may not, other people.
Right.
Or like I have teachers that come up to me and are like kind of venting, like, man, we're reading this book in class that I really like. I don't feel comfortable as a Christian, like letting our middle school students read this. And so they're like sharing these things with me. And we've even prayed, I've even had teachers in the past that have like invited me to prayer meetings and prayed for the schools. And it's been really interesting. So yeah, I've seen a lot of cool things in that realm, a lot of need, a lot of opportunity. So you can do ministry anywhere. Obviously,
Yeah.
most people know that or follow Jesus. Like, you don't just have to be in full-time career ministry, but like God needs people in every single sphere to believe wholeheartedly that they're a minister, that they're on a mission to help people know Christ.
Right. The Great Commission doesn't have career boundaries.
Exactly. Which, yeah, just figuring out how to help people realize that and empower them to like overcome some of those discomforts of like living out their faith, even in small ways. Doesn't have to be, like I said, creating a riot out in front of the
Right.
school or something. It can be like having these relationships with
Yeah.
people's in the schools and blessing them. So
when you said that hunger that you notice in a lot of people, that's kind of eye-opening for myself, because I think I fall into kind of the stereotypical view of like, no one wants to talk about politics or religion.
yeah.
Did you find that to get to that place of noticing that hunger, you had to push past any like self-constructed barriers in your mind about like being open about who you are, who you like, that you follow God, like kind of push through those barriers and be like, I'm open to talking about anything?
Yeah. Well, I think, again, that's another area that God's been really gracious with me, is like I've been praying that God would use me and I would be obedient, like first and foremost. And so then I believe that everywhere that I go is, purposeful, because of He's opened a door. And so like I'm here at this place, at these schools, because He's put me here. And I know that I don't want to over spiritualize something, but I've prayed and sought Him and prayed for His divine intervention in this type of thing. And so it's given me a boldness to overcome some of those things that I was previously kind of probably fearful about. Like my goal is to reach as many people, really, no matter the cost. Now I have family, kids, and a wife that I want to be a good leader for and take care of, but and that also is another element of responsibility of living a life of faith. Like, what do they see their husband and their dad, like how do they see
Right.
that person living in spite of the opposition of the world?
But a lot of the time that cost in kind of our Western context might even just be opening yourself up to ridicule,
Mm-hmm.
or having someone give you that eye roll when you say, I follow Jesus.
Yeah. I try to know the audience that I'm, talking to as much as I can, but that's not always possible. And, like praying that God would create the right opportunities. I think the more that you step out in faith, the more that you take a risk, the more you learn, right? Like sometimes you have setbacks or whatever, or like it didn't go the way that you would hope it would go, but then like you learn, right? It's like a trial and error type of thing. People, I think they're so hungry that like for the most part, pushback has been minimal, like to sharing, hey, this is another thing that I do. This is a community that I'm a part of. Like, I think they're so desperate, honestly, that they're willing to push aside some of that stuff to listen. Yeah, I've built a lot of relationships over time too, over 2 years. So I have some relational equity too. That helps.
Yeah.
Right. I'm not just going in there and saying, hey, this is what's up.
Yep.
So
they know that you care about
They know that I care, and they see that I care, like by the way that I carry myself and treat people. And then later on, that usually leads to more conversation, but sometimes it doesn't. So I'm just believing that I'm planting seeds in every sphere, and those seeds are going to reap a harvest. Like, I wholeheartedly believe that.
Yeah. And I think sometimes we might get the privilege of planting that seed, but God might lead someone else into their life to water it.
Yeah,
and we might never see that seed sprout, but that doesn't mean it hasn't, which is frustrating to think about, because we like seeing the fruits of our labor. But when you think about it kind of in the context of like, this isn't about me, that might take some of the edge off. Like, I don't need to see this grow to its full fruition. Like, I'm okay being used as a step that God's kind of deconstructing for this person to reach himself.
Yeah, I think I've kind of this idea, and I haven't fleshed it out, but it's been with me for years now. But like this idea that love is never lost. There's probably something in scripture about it, right? But like love is never lost. Like when you invest love, when you inject it into it, it's kind of like the pay it forward like mentality. Like it's gonna multiply, just like sin is gonna multiply too, right? But you think about planting a tree. Well, if the tree gets watered and then it grows, well, like an oak tree, it drops acorns and then it produces more trees. Kind of like that. I think love is the same way. Unfortunately, sometimes you don't get to see the forest grow from the acorn that you planted, but the forest does grow. Yeah. So,
and that'll be something really fun to see, I think, in the life to come when we're given a peek behind that curtain and get to see that forest.
Right. Absolutely.
We maybe had a play in whether we were planting a seed, helping water something, or just pulling out a weed. I think we'll be able to see like the whole communal aspect of the body of Christ and how it can take a seed and grow a forest.
That's the hard part too, is because if we go back to that idea of the hero maker, this idea of being the hero of the story, I think it derails the mission of making other people like heroes and building them up. Because sometimes we don't see that benefit. We're like, oh, I'm just investing in somebody else, or I'm just giving of myself to somebody else, and there's no return on that investment. And the world doesn't really give you any, encouragement in that. It depends on where you're storing up your treasures too, right? Like
True.
What are you trying to build? Are you trying to build an earthly kingdom, or are you trying to build the eternal kingdom? Like, is it for you or is it for somebody else?
But it is really encouraging kind of hearing you say that you've noticed this hunger for God or for something spiritual, something even if the person can't fully define what it is, something beyond themselves. Because I think that's an aspect that a lot of people maybe don't see when they're trying to plant those seeds, and they get really discouraged because they don't see that hunger. But it's great hearing from other people like yourself that it's there, that it exists out there. So even if you haven't, talking to the listener now, if you haven't seen it in your own life and people that you've been praying for or trying to invest in, that doesn't mean it's not there. Like, it's
Absolutely.
good hearing the testimonies of that hunger being there.
Yeah, I think it's, I know it is. I mean, and being a former youth pastor that now has students that are older and beyond college, that have graduated college, I've seen the hunger. Some of them, you see them like continue to grow in their relationship with Jesus, and others, choose different paths, but they're still pursuing spiritual things. They may not be where you want them to pursue, but like, there's just, everybody has that soul hunger within them. And a lot of times when you are willing to be courageous enough to say, hey, like, this is what I believe, or even to like kind of weave it into your conversation.
Yeah.
Not making things about you like narcissist, but also just saying like, hey, this is some of the things that I value. Like, if you're going to get to know me, this is part of who I am, and I'm not ashamed of it anymore like I once was, or like the world tells me maybe I should be sometimes, because, again, the church and humans, we've fallen short too. Like everybody knows people that call themselves Christians that are, legalists, hypocrites, really poor representations of little Christs,
I remember one guy that I met once who would always talk about Jesus and God and how great he was and how awesome he was. And it was like, okay, this guy, when he's talking to someone, God and Jesus, they're just going to naturally come up in the conversation, because for this man, it was like Jesus was all consuming in his life. So it was just the most natural thing to come up. Not to say that everyone is going to be just like that, but I did notice getting to know you, how comfortable you were just being open about your faith and that you were a pastor. And I was like, that's really cool. But I also think it's really cool and a good takeaway for people that there are those times where you need to be kind of like upfront and talk about it and weave it into conversation and not be ashamed. But then sometimes God will use that sticker on your water bottle that says Rescue House Church
Right.
to open a door to make a connection with someone. So I think it's cool that even just in this half hour that we've been talking, seeing kind of both the more subtle of just a sticker on the water bottle led me to talking to you about faith. And now here we are. And then other experiences you've had where you've been a little more forthright with just not being ashamed, just letting your faith be a part of normal conversation, just like any topic.
I think it's taken a lot of like prayer and intentionality too, but it's a switch. Like I told you, when I changed the way that I viewed myself, like when I really surrendered my life to Jesus wholeheartedly, that meant like I surrendered every part of myself. And so before being a scientist or a pastor or whatever, I was a son of God. And also, as I studied scripture over time, I learned that he had equipped me with a mission in mind. And that mission was like, this is what it is. And so I'm always evaluating, like, how am I doing on this mission? Not that it's like to make me feel guilty or whatever, but it's just like, hey, the world needs to hear this message. There's so many hurting, hopeless people. And I know, like, I can't get them the resources they need, but I know that they can have, we say this at Rescue House, one moment in the presence of God can change everything. And we believe that. So like one moment with God can change everything for somebody, like how they think about themselves, how they think about their future. That's my prayer with people, is like they can have those moments. And so sometimes it might not ever be a conversation, but it might just be a prayer. Again, I don't get it right. There's a lot of days where I'm, like just going through the motions to get the paycheck because I'm tired and I have a headache or whatever it is. But there's other days that I'm like, okay, what's the plan? What's the mission? Well, I do have to be here to help these students learn their, content, but can I do it in such a way that they will see there's something different about me? Like, how am I going to present this material to them? And I might even use examples from the Bible because it just naturally comes to my head. Or, I might use language that'd be like, oh, there's something different about this guy. Like, he's not just using secular language, so.
Right.
We could talk about that forever, I'm sure, but
Right.
just some examples of like practicing it. And I have the luxury of practicing on a public level, like my faith. One of the verses that's really impacted me in the last 10 years has been Acts 1:8. It says, you will receive power when the Holy Spirit comes on you, and you will be my witnesses. Basically, here, near, and far. Where you're at today, near you and beyond, like the world, right? So you will receive power. You'll have the power of the Holy Spirit, and you'll be my witnesses. So that whole like testifying about what God's done in your life is actually something that God wants to use. And when I started to really take ownership of that, not only do I have a healthier picture of myself, I also understand that I can help people with my testimony.
Yeah.
God uses that in a profound way.
Right.
So, yeah.
And that's part of the reason the name Story 516 came about, that we all have stories and all our stories are a part of, or are supposed to be reflecting God's larger story. So kind of like each story is a testimony pointing you to something, to the story.
That's awesome. I didn't know that.
Yeah. No. So I love that unintentional connection there. Thanks for joining us today.
Yeah. Thanks for hanging out a little bit and talking about Jesus and how we can encourage each other on this journey, because we got to do it. We got to encourage each other, and we got to keep lighting up darkness.
Yeah. We're in this together.
So,
and everyone, keep a lookout for those stickers on water bottles, because you never know when you'll make a new friend. Thank you for joining us. You can support the show by going to our Patreon page at patreon.com/story516. You can also find us on Facebook, Instagram, YouTube, Spotify, and Apple Podcasts. We look forward to seeing you next time.